May I now request the High Commissioner, Mr. Wajid Shamsul Hassan, for his opening remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Khalid. My Lords, members of House of Parliament, distinguished guests, we have gathered here to show our solidarity with the people of Kashmir for the right of self-determination. I am indeed very grateful to you all for having come here this evening, although I was fearing the weather. But your presence shows how much committed you are to the great cause. I am indeed overwhelmed by the presence of speakers for the seminar, MP Right Honourable Sir Gerald Kaufman, MP Steve Barker, and Lord Qurban Hussain. Lord Nazir has very kindly consented to be the moderator. So I hope he can moderate whenever need be. My friends, Sir Gerald Kaufman needs no introduction. He is the longest serving Labour Party MP. He may appear, if you pardon me to say, Lord, my Sir Gerald, frail, but he has the steel determination and perseverance for stoutly espousing genuine causes pertaining to the fate of shackled people such as the cause of Kashmiri people. Close to his heart as well is Palestine issue. Both deal with oppressive nationalities against helpless multitudes, victims of crimes and follies of those leaders who drew the lines on the new map of the world in post-World War II. Sir Gerald was a minister in Prime Minister Harold Wilson's cabinet and also shadow minister of various departments such as Environment, Industry, Home and Foreign Affairs. He has also been on the Speaker's Committee for the Election Commission. For his meritorious services towards strengthening Pakistan-UK relations, Sir Gerald was conferred the highest civil award for a living person, Hilal-e-Pakistan, that he has on his chest. Sir Gerald is a prolific writer and an orator who does not have a peer. He maintains keen interest in South Asia, particularly Kashmir. This evening, he would trace the genesis of the Kashmir dispute. Our next speaker is Lord Qurban Hussain of Luton. He is Liberal Democrat, is a well-known name. His services to the community and proactive role in politics has earned him a peerage last year. Being of Kashmiri descent himself, the issue is close to his heart. He is concerned about the adverse impact of the dispute on life across the subcontinent, but more so on the lives of the Kashmiris. He would therefore dwell on the subject. Our third speaker is a promising Conservative MP, Steve Barker, from Wycombe, who is sitting on my right. He earned his laurels when he initiated a 3-hour-long debate in the House of Commons on human rights in Kashmir in September last. He would look into the UN role, its failure to resolve the dispute, and what needs to be done now. Our moderator, of course, is Lord Aziz Ahmad, first Muslim peer of Pakistan in descent, and is the youngest ever to have become a member of House of Lords. A member of the Labour Party, he takes keen interest in the national and international politics and issues of human rights, including right of self-determination for the people of Kashmir. He is a skillful negotiator that led to the release of British teacher Gillian Gibbons. Ladies and gentlemen, Kashmir Solidarity Day is solemnly observed every year by the government and people of Pakistan to show respect and express solidarity with the Kashmiri people for their courage and sustained struggle for their rights against all odds for the past 6 decades. Government of Pakistan extends diplomatic, political and moral support to the legitimate struggle against foreign occupation. Its vociferous observation globally is to wake up the sleeping conscience of international observers and shakers movers and shakers, and break the silence over the atrocities that have come to be the order of the day in Kashmir. It also reminds the United Nations of its commitment to the people of Kashmir to determine their destiny as enshrined in the successful United Nations resolutions. Distinguished guests, Kashmir dispute is the core issue keeping successive governments hostage to it. Let me inform the worthy audience that Pakistan's internationally renowned leader, Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, initiated the observance of Kashmir Solidarity Day in February 1976 to express solidarity with the people of Kashmir, observing then a 3-day protest strike against the Indian yoke. It was under the Bhuttos and the PPP that the Kashmir people had Pakistani power at their elbow. Bhutto set the Kashmir issue alight between 1972 and 1977. His 5th of February strike call for Kashmir was observed so overwhelmingly that everything in Pakistan and Kashmir had come to a halt. And when he was martyred, nowhere burnt like Kashmir. They knew better and more profoundly that all he had lost in his death. His daughter, Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto, who was also martyred, picked up the pieces when she became Prime Minister in 1988. Intifada in Kashmir at the time was a coincidence. I remember her painstaking virulent visits to more than 16 Arab states in mid-1990 to revive OIC's interest in Kashmir. It was her efforts that enabled APSC to acquire observer status in OIC. By contrast, other rulers had more or less fiddled, while Kashmir was known to be the world's as an occupied, disputed territory with largest ever occupation forces jackpooting the rights of the Kashmiri people. When the PPP government was in power, as far away as Brighton in 1995, Labour Party conference, that support and encouragement was felt and told for good. The freedom fighters knew it, the enraged Indian lobby knew it, the brave Jawans and the generals knew it, and the masses of Pakistan knew it, and they shall never forget it. And I am sure posterity shall always remember it. I am sure Sir Gerald, you remember, even Lord Nazir would remember, Qurban and everybody a lot of people who are here, how you spearheaded that Brighton resolution acknowledging the right of self-determination of the people of Kashmir. And we all hold you in highest of esteem. Ignoring the divide, the former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband made it clear when he called for resolution of the Kashmir dispute in the interest of regional security. Miliband's visit was a jarring reminder to India to stop offshoring its Pakistan policy. This was the quote from Indian Security Affairs analyst Brahma Chelani in the Asian Age soon after Miliband's visit. The manifestation of Bhutto's love, affection and sympathies are amply reflected in his famous statement, "We would fight for 1,000 years for the right to self-determination for our Kashmiri brethren." Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, during her 2 stints in power, also pursued and promoted the Kashmir cause vigorously and made resolute efforts to draw the attention of the world to the violation of human rights in the held Kashmir and to gather international support for the oppressed people of Jammu and Kashmir. The present democratic government in Pakistan has made it loud and clear that resolution of Kashmir dispute remains on top of its agenda. To that end, the government has made numerous overtures to make peace with India with a view to resolving this outstanding issue and hence ensure stability and progress in the region. Pakistan strongly considers Kashmiris the key stakeholders and ultimate architects of their own destiny. I must acknowledge, my friends, the present British government's proactive role in emphasizing that Kashmir issue be resolved bilaterally through dialogue. Since dialogue has begun and forward moves have been made, Pakistan and India have agreed to resume composite dialogue to discuss all issues, including Kashmir. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for long world has been misled from this issue by terming the struggle in Kashmir as being sponsored by Pakistan. Claims about external interference as false have been proved by international community. The international media and human rights organizations have unanimously declared the ongoing movement as indigenous. The scrutiny of the situation in Kashmir not only proved such claims as sham, but also unearthed the brutalities committed with impunity by the occupation security forces. This discovery of unmarked mass graves has shocked the world and raised alarm even across India, particularly the human rights activists. Given the situation, Indian claims of elections in Jammu and Kashmir also stand exposed. The detection of thousands of unmarked graves in the 3 districts of Kapura, Baramulla and Bandalagpura is an appalling state of human rights situation in Jammu and Kashmir. The international community must realize it and act now. Act fast it must. A little late could be too late. Distinguished friends, speakers today intend to highlight 3 key aspects of the Kashmir dispute. That is, tracing the root cause of the dispute. It would help in the resolution of the problem. Understand the very serious implications of the non-implementation of successful UN resolutions and failures of the international community to fulfill its obligations also warrants our understanding. The delay in its resolution has allowed occupation forces to continue with their severe repressive measures in Jammu and Kashmir, making the human rights violations a compounded tragedy. The impact of Kashmir dispute is adversely affecting the socio-economic progress in the region, race for militarization and turning the region into a nuclear flashpoint. The 2 nations are spending huge amounts on their defense with negligible spending on human development. As a direct consequence, world's largest poor population is concentrated in these 2 countries living below poverty line. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I request Lord Nazir to take the mic and begin the proceedings, and I wish you all success. Thank you.
Your Excellency, my Lord, members of Parliament, mayors, councillors, very distinguished leaders of the British Pakistani Kashmiri community. First of all, let me begin by thanking the Pakistan High Commission for organizing this unique and very different seminar from the normal seminars that we hold. So, Your Excellency, may I first of all say thank you very much to you and all your staff, and in particular, can I say thank you very much to Mohammad Nafis Zakaria, and with a round of applause, everybody should say thank you to him for organizing this event, because to have such distinguished gathering here of leaders of the Kashmiri and Pakistani community from all over the United Kingdom, I think it's quite a success. One big credit to you, Your Excellency, is making sure that I am the moderator, so I don't make any long speeches. Yeah. And my job is to stick to the agenda of 3 speeches. This is unique because His Excellency has already told you that we have 3 speakers and we have 3 topics. And each speaker will explore many ideas into the topic that they're being given. And nobody better than somebody who was mentioned by His Excellency back in 1995, and I've had the honor of knowing him for many years before, but certainly in 1995 when Sir Gerald Kaufman was the Shadow Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, of course in the Labour Party, who has been associated with the Kashmir cause for very long time. So it gives me great pleasure to ask Sir Gerald to trace the genesis of Kashmir dispute and take the floor.
Your Excellency, Lord Ahmed, distinguished guests, It is a very great privilege for me to, first of all, to have been invited here this afternoon for, as Lord Armand accurately says, this unique seminar. And it is a particular privilege for me to be here to discuss this issue, which has been a part of my political life for a very long time indeed. I have visited Kashmir on many occasions. I've visited Azad Kashmir and seen the devastation that has been inflicted there. And I have visited Indian-held Kashmir. I visited Srinagar and I visited Jammu and seen the situation there as well. This is the most long-standing, unsolved political problem on this planet. It is even older than the Palestine problem, with which I am also associated. But this has been a problem ever since the date when the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir decided to bring Jammu and Kashmir into the then Dominion of India rather than into Pakistan. And although I have been immersed in this problem for very many years, it was very interesting indeed for me to refresh my memory as to how this problem, this devastating problem, originated. We look at the problem from the point of view of what happened when India and Pakistan became independent. India on the 15th of August 1947 and Pakistan on the 14th of August 1947. And on that day, all princely states in India had made a decision as to which of the two countries, their states, should be incorporated. Because there were hundreds of 500 princely states, and each one of them had a semi-independence, except one, which was Jammu and Kashmir, because Jammu and Kashmir was never entirely and totally integrated into the Indian Empire, as it was called when Britain occupied and administered it. And in the preparations for the independence of these two new Commonwealth countries, arrangements had been made, and in almost every case had been accepted as to which state would go into which country. There were 3 states apart from Jammu and Kashmir where there was doubt about it, the best known of which being Hyderabad. But in the end, the Indians made sure that those 3 states were incorporated into India. But there was huge delay by the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir as to which of the 2 countries Jammu and Kashmir should be incorporated into. And even though the independence date was the 14th and 15th of August, it was not until the 26th of October, more than 2 months after Independence Day, that the Maharaja decided that Jammu and Kashmir should be incorporated into India. And that decision was so controversial that it aroused a comment by Viscount Mountbatten. And let us remember that Viscount Mountbatten, the uncle of our Queen, that Viscount Mountbatten was so close to India that although he had been governor of the Indian Empire under British sovereignty, he immediately became Governor General of India when India became an independent dominion. And what he said after the Maharaja had decided to incorporate Jammu and Kashmir into India was this: in the special circumstances mentioned to Your Highness, that is the Maharaja, my government has that's the Indian government, has decided to accept the accession of Kashmir state to the Dominion of India, in consistence with their policy that in the case of any state where the issue of accession has been the subject of dispute, the question of accession should be decided in accordance with the wishes of the people of the state. It is my government's wish that as soon as law and order have been restored in Kashmir and her soil cleared of the invader, the question of the state's accession shall be settled by a reference to the people. So right from the start, a strong supporter of India, who would become the Governor General of India, said that the decision of the Maharaja to incorporate into India could only be validated by a vote of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And for nearly 65 years, we have been waiting for that vote, which was promised and which became, as I shall point out, international law. The fact is that that Kashmir has been a Muslim state since the 14th century. There have been ups and downs in the history of Kashmir, but nevertheless that has been the situation. The Muslims ruled it since the 14th century. It was conquered by the Sikhs in 1814, and although it was within the borders of the Indian Empire, it had never been integrated fully into India. And as independence approached to be validated and instituted in August 1947, the Maharaja made bloodthirsty efforts to drive out Muslims, particularly from Jammu. And nearly 250,000 Muslims in Jammu were either massacred or driven out, and their villages were set on fire. Now, the principle on which partition was based was very clear: that states which were predominantly Muslim should be incorporated into Pakistan, and states which were predominantly Hindu should be incorporated into India. Now, at the time of independence, 78% of the total population of Jammu and Kashmir were Muslims. The rest were divided into Hindus and into Buddhists, predominantly Hindus. And I have seen that because on one of my visits, I went up to Ladakh and saw the Buddhists, who have never been involved in this conflict, but simply want to live in peace and have a decent life in their remote area in the Himalayan foothills. So, as I say, the decision was up to the Maharaja, and the Maharaja broke the rule that Muslims should go to Pakistan and Hindus should go to India. And then what happened was that Azad Kashmir was established immediately because of the decision to force Jammu and Kashmir into India. And what was decided was that because the issue was so tender and so in doubt, the matter should be taken to the United Nations Security Council. Now, who took it to the United Nations Security Council? Nehru took it to the Security Council. Not Pakistan, but Nehru took it to the Security Council. And therefore the assumption had to be that India would accept the jurisdiction of the Security Council. But the Security Council did not do what India complacently expected it to do. It passed a resolution. India had taken the issue to the Security Council on January the 1st, 1948. And on the 21st of April, 1948, the Security Council passed a resolution laying down conditions for a plebiscite. And at first, Pakistan was not happy with those conditions, but then it accepted the resolution. The Indians were not clear about what they would do, but they soon became very clear indeed, because the Indian army launched a military attack upon Kashmir. And the history since then, in more than 60 years, the history has been of a series of resolutions and interventions by the Security Council and then by others in order to get the United Nations Security Council resolution implemented. All of those resolutions called for a plebiscite of the people, that the people should be able to vote as to whether they went into India or Pakistan. And it was perfectly obvious, with 78% of the population being Muslim, how they would vote if they were given the chance to vote. All of the UN resolutions over a very considerable period called for a plebiscite. The Security Council even appointed a plebiscite administrator. Pakistan immediately offered to comply with the resolution and the rules. India opposed it. Because the differences at that time, unfortunately not only at that time, but throughout the 65 years since then, have been obstructed by India, the United Nations proposed arbitration. And in those days, as I shall point out for some considerable time longer too, the main leaders in the world supported arbitration. The British Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, whose government had given India independence and brought about the partition, following the lead of the Quaid-e-Azam as to the fact that there had to be a Muslim state, Attlee supported arbitration. The President of the United States, Harry Truman, also publicly supported arbitration. And how different, Claude Armand, that is from the stance of the United States President today, whose main interest seems to be invading Pakistan, violating its sovereignty and causing bloodshed there. But the President of the United States supported arbitration. Again, the President of the Security Council proposed a solution to get the matter resolved. Pakistan said yes, India said no. The United Nations Security Council then appointed a representative, Sir Owen Dixon, a judge of the Australian High Court and subsequently the Chief Justice of Australia. He worked extremely hard to get the implementation of the decisions of the United Nations, but he resigned, and he resigned out of utter frustration. He said, "In the end, I became convinced that India's agreement would never be obtained to demilitarization in any such form, or to provisions governing the period of the plebiscite, or of any such character, as would, in my opinion, permit of the plebiscite being conducted in conditions sufficiently guarding against intimidation and other forms of influence and abuse by which the freedom and fairness of the plebiscite might be imperiled." So this frustrating procedure with the United Nations Security Council spending a huge amount of its time trying to get a solution continued. And in 1951, we got a new international body that became involved. The Commonwealth Conference, meeting in London, meeting not too far from where we are meeting this evening. It proposed a framework for a plebiscite. Pakistan agreed and said yes, and India said no. And since then, in 60 years and more, there's been a long history of continued Indian obstruction. In 1957, again, the United Nations called for a plebiscite, and the President of the Security Council made a new proposal as to how the plebiscite should be conducted. Pakistan said yes, India said no. In 1962, President John Kennedy of the United States made a proposal for a solution of the problem. Pakistan said yes, India said no. And there were wars. There was a war in 65, there was a war in 71. And let's be clear about this. All of the confrontations that have taken place since then, as Lord Ahmed has said, the incredible expenditure on armaments that has 500,000 Indian troops in Kashmir at a time when 1/10 of the Indian population is living below the Indian poverty level, making Pakistan obliged to arm as well for fear of being invaded and overwhelmed by these huge numbers of Indian troops. Both countries now with deliverable nuclear weapons. A great deal of discussion is made about the potential acquisition of nuclear weapons by Iran, and a great deal of nonsense is being talked about that as well, deplorable though the acquisition of nuclear weapons in Iran would be. But nevertheless, we have two countries which have fought a series of wars, which are spending amounts of money they simply cannot afford on a military confrontation, who have nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles, and we still do not have a solution. And the record shows that this is not a case of two countries equally at fault. Far from it. The record shows without any doubt whatsoever that a solution could have been reached long ago, because Pakistan was ready to participate in such a solution, and India has never from day one, from October 1947, has never wanted a solution. So don't let us, at this seminar, be deluded into believing that it is two sides equally at fault. It is one side that wants a solution and another side that has blocked a solution for 2/3 of a century. And that is why it's essential that we have these renewed discussions and this seminar and other events, because it is essential to keep this at the forefront of the international agenda. And heaven knows our dear High Commissioner has worked hard to do this. And when he was previously High Commissioner, we went to the European Parliament, and we've done many other things in order to try to get this solved. And we have to push and push and push, because the present United Kingdom government, the Minister Alastair Burt, has said over and over again that the United Kingdom government will not involve itself in the Kashmir problem at all, let alone seek to find a solution for it. The President of the United States, whose objectives sometimes bewilder me, apart from his wish to be re-elected, the President of the United States, who ought to understand the fragile nature of the situation in South Asia, does nothing. And that's why we, who are dedicated to this issue, must go on plugging away and not let it be forgotten and put it up at the forefront. And I thank you, High Commissioner, for involving me in today's seminar, which is part of this essential process.
Sir Gerald, thank you very much for that fascinating, factual and historic facts and history into the Kashmir issue. And thank you also for your own analysis and your own input. And we really treasure that and we appreciate. Can I please ask colleagues who've got telephones, please switch them off, because this is very important. And one thing that, this is an important seminar, one thing that Sir Gerald talked about is the huge amounts of money that is being spent on weapons, and which has a socio-economic impact on the region because of this dispute, this issue. And as you know, recently the Indian government has just announced another $100 billion that they are spending extra in the next 5 years. So, I mean, you know, for those people who think, well, why should Pakistan spend any money on their army or weapons? Pakistan has no choice. Kashmiris have no choice but to, you know, I don't think Pakistan can spend $100 billion, but this is not 100 billions in total, is extra $100 billion. And had we got the contract, I might have not said so much, it's the French who got the contract. Anyway, that was just light mood. I think that it's a waste of money. It could have been spent better on eradication of poverty. Sir Gerald, you're absolutely right to say about poverty, because there are millions of people in India. And that's why our British DFID money goes to India, because there are so many poor people live in India. Had that money been spent on Indian people, who, many of them, who are born on footpath, they grow up on footpath and they die on footpath because they never see a house. So, to discuss this, the socio-economic impact of Kashmir dispute in the region, nobody better than my good friend, Lord Qurban Hussain. We mentioned 1995 Labour Party conference, and he was part of that, but long before then, he has been involved with the issue of Kashmir. He knows it, he understands it, and because he comes from Azad Kashmir, where he was born, he understands on this side, but he's certainly studied the socio-economic impact on both sides and in the region. Lord Qurban Hussain.
Thank you. My Lord, Members of Parliament, His Excellency, the High Commissioner, Pakistan, Deputy Commissioner, friends, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a good evening to you all. I'm being asked to speak on the socio-economic impact of the Kashmir issue in the region. And before I start saying something on that, just to remind people, I mean, most of you know about Kashmir, but just to put things into context, that about 12 million people who live in Kashmir, over 85,000 square miles, which is all divided in India, between India and Pakistan. And Kashmir is known as a heaven on earth for its natural beauty. It was, still is. It has natural beauty. It is known for Kashmir wool, Kashmiri fruit, saffron. It has some of the highest peaks in the world, including K2 and Nanga Parbat. It has the biggest water resource in that region, which supplies both to India and Pakistan. And the mountains of Kashmir are full of natural minerals. And if there was peace in that area, not only Kashmir, the whole region could be very prosperous. Unfortunately, the area is one of the most heavily militarized zones in the world, whereas only on Indian side there is 700,000 military personnel who are not there just to keep people happy. They are committing some of the worst human rights violations in the world. 100,000 people or more, because nobody has an accurate account. Because still mass graves are turning up all over. We don't know exactly how many people were killed over the years. But over 100,000 estimate is a rough estimate that people put it out. There are many thousands who have gone missing. There are tens of thousands of injured people. There is a whole generation of orphans, widows, and something else that the world doesn't actually know about, the half-widows that they call them. And they are the women who lost their husbands, never confirmed whether they were dead or alive. They can't get married again because they don't know whether their husband is died or not. And there are people who are still behind the bars, arrested, tortured, under some of the draconian laws. One of the reports that recently, or a few months ago, the Amnesty International produced, it was called the lawless law. And most of us on this side of the table, and many of you perhaps would have read it as well. It gives an account of what kind of laws are implemented in that part of the world. We talk about military regimes in different countries. My God, the so-called largest democracy on earth. All one got to learn is read the lawless law. And you will find out what kind of democracy India runs in Kashmir. It all happens while the world thinks that India is the most favored country in the world. India, a lot of people forget they still have 128 million people who lack clean drinking water. They don't have access to clean drinking water. 8.39 million have no sanitation services. 300 million live under the poverty line. 21 million people are unemployed. And I'll give you a little account of Pakistan as well, because it has direct impact on India in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there are 1.8 million people who still need clean drinking water. And there are 60 million who don't have sanitation services. And there are 20 million who are living under the line of poverty. And the list goes on. But the biggest issue here is, yes, India and Pakistan both are developing countries and they do need resources to build them. But what about the cost that they are spending on military? Because of Kashmir. India's annual defense budget is $36.28 billion a year. On top of that, what Lord Nazir Ahmad just said, India decided to spend more. While Pakistan is also spending something like $5.48 billion on defense, according to the World Bank. By the way, most of these figures are coming from the World Bank. So if you look at the level of poverty in the whole region, in India and Pakistan, there are humans living in India as well as Pakistan, my friend. And I have no ground to crime or, about Indian people. They are good people. Those poor people, it's not their fault. India is occupying Kashmir by force. It's not the ordinary Indians' fault that there are human rights violations taking place in Kashmir. Indian poor people are just as much victim of these governments who are spending billions on defense rather than spending money on them to educate their children, to provide them water and the health service. I think it is time the world had woken up. The amount of money that our government gives to India, it's about time that we attach that with human rights, the record of human rights. If the American president is brave enough to raise the human rights violations issue with the Chinese leader when they visit, I wonder why never we have heard any of the British prime ministers raising human rights issues with India when they see Indian prime ministers. And here we see a lot of double standards on part of the Western governments, including the British government, whichever party may have been in office, when it comes to international affairs. When it comes to East Timor, when it comes to Sudan, their right of self-determination is implemented or given to them much quicker. But when you turn to Kashmir, I have been criticized, and I'm sure others would also might have been criticized in their own parties for raising Kashmir too often. But I have learned from Karl Koppen and Nazir Ahmed and others that none of us are going to shy away. These are committed people that I'm going to follow. And we will continue to raise these issues. These are basic human rights issue that we're talking about. The socio-economic impact in the whole region of India and Pakistan. We cannot continue to ignore the suffering of people in India and Pakistan as well as Kashmir. This has to stop. And we had to, I would say, if the Indian government record doesn't improve on human rights, we ought to hold our aid to India. That must be linked. If we can link it with other countries, why can't we link it with India for human rights? And for India and Pakistan, if old enemies in Europe, Germany, France, and Britain can come together and resolve their issues peacefully and have economic impact, economic contacts and relations, India and Pakistan should also learn too. But give the people their rights. The people deserve better from them in India and Pakistan, and certainly both countries have international obligations to resolve the Kashmir issue through the United Nations resolutions and the mutual agreements that they have. Under the similar agreement, both countries agreed to put an end to the conflict and confrontation, and that their relation, and they work toward the relation to promote the friendly and harmonious relationship. And they did promise that they will resolve the Kashmir issue according to the will of the people. And I hope we do that. And the impact that Kashmir issue is having on both India and Pakistan, as well as Kashmiris, is resolved. Because otherwise, the amount of money that they keep spending on defense, they will never catch up with the rest of the world. And it's about time the world looks at its aid and tell India and Pakistan to come together and resolve the issue according to the wishes of Pakistan. People of Kashmir, I must say here, Your Excellency, that any resolution which must come forward has to be with the agreement of the Kashmiri people. Any imposed solution which Kashmiri people are not part of or they are not consulted with is not going to be long-lasting. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Qurban Hussain, and thank you for those last few comments as well, in particular with having the agreement of the Kashmiri people, but also the facts and figures in relation to the socio-economic impact of Kashmir dispute in the region, and particularly both India, Pakistan and Kashmir. During Sir Gerald Kaufman's speech, he mentioned UN resolutions of 1948, 49, and a list of them right up to 1957. And I understand that the United Nations used to annually have Kashmir on its agenda for discussion because there is a legal position of Kashmir because of the United Nations resolutions, Sir Gerald, from 1948 and 49, which it doesn't now discuss. And there is a responsibility on Secretary General to make sure that where there are abuses of human rights and where there is danger of a nuclear war or a conflict that could actually bring the entire region, in fact the world, into this conflict, then they should do something about it. To discuss UN role in resolving the conflict of Kashmir, which has become a nuclear flashpoint in South Asia, there is no better than a member of Parliament from High Wycombe, Steve Baker, who historically made a wonderful speech in his 2-hour debate in the House of Commons, a new member of Parliament, but who is working well with the community, and I'm glad to see Councillor Bhatti and other community leaders here from High Wycombe, and I'm glad that they are working with you, Steve. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Your Excellency, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum, a very good afternoon. Thank you all very much indeed for this opportunity to come and demonstrate my solidarity with the cause of self-determination for Kashmir. The case for self-determination, for peace and prosperity, the imperative, has been set out very clearly, and I'd congratulate Sir Gerald on the masterful summary he's given us of the history of the dispute. And Lord Hussein has also absolutely clearly set out the imperative. In fact, the notes I made was that I thought that Lord Hussein made the clear case that politicians are the problem, but perhaps that's for another day. It was a real honour to secure that debate in the House of Commons, and I was absolutely overwhelmed by all of your support, but I should also say the support of members of Parliament. It happened that it was my initiative following the discovery of a lawless law. In fact, there's the main report. When I first heard about this report and the clear abuses of human rights which it documents, it was that moved me to call for this debate in backbench time on the main floor of the House of Commons. And I'm extremely grateful to Lord Nazir for forming and chairing the APPG so that we became aware of this report. My intention was always to give voice to my Kashmiri constituents. This is your democracy, your country, but of course you still have grave concerns for Kashmir, and I recognise that, and that's why I wanted to secure this debate and give you voice. And I think actually that's the lesson for the British government, is given the many thousands, not just of Kashmiris, but also of Indians and Pakistanis in the UK. It's right, I think, that the British government should increase its efforts, if nothing else, just simply to give voice to all of your concerns. I would say this, that at the moment we meet in grave times. The whole of Europe faces a grave economic crisis. We've had a government in Italy replaced by an appointed technocratic government. We see real unrest both in Greece and to a lesser extent in Spain. We face a possible currency collapse across most of the countries of Europe. And I think in all of this, we must take lessons from Kashmir that self-determination at the ballot box is the way to ensure that political power is held under democratic control and held legitimate in times of great suffering. So that is one of the elements of the context to my remarks today. I'd like to cover really three areas. First of all, the general approach that I personally bring to considering Kashmir. I'd like, of course, to make most of my remarks about the United Nations itself, and then finally how I think that the United Nations should apply itself to Kashmir. In terms then of a general approach, well, I'd like to make an appeal for humility. I often feel unequal personally to the task of trying to find a way through for Kashmir, but I don't feel that that is in particular a bad reflection on me. I think it's a reflection on the horrible, awful reality that no one has managed to find a way forward for Kashmir in all of this time. So I would say that we must find a way to be humble. As a person of Anglo-Saxon, I suppose, British descent, I'm also very aware of our own history. In particular, that the dispute in Kashmir is a legacy of the withdrawal of the British Empire. I also have a number of Sri Lankan constituents, and they too suffer the brutal legacy of the disputes which emerged after the withdrawal of the British Empire. There are some people in the United Kingdom who think that a British MP should not be concerned with these matters. But I have to say to them that there are two things they should bear in mind. First of all, in some senses, though it may not be my fault that these disputes have arisen, I think it is certainly the case that historically the British government has sown the seeds of this awful legacy of suffering. And secondly, as I've said before, it is our responsibility to give voice to you, British people, who live here and have these concerns. Secondly, within general approach, I think what's important is to apply general principles. And with that in mind, another reason for humility in all of this is that we have in the United Kingdom now not control orders, but terrorist prevention and investigation measures. I'm very aware of the history of terrorism in the UK. I served in the Royal Air Force, and when I joined, we had to be extremely careful for bombs under our cars because we faced a very real Irish terror threat. Now, I visited Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you that that country, though peaceful on the whole now, is still riven by sectarianism. And I'm very aware that the British government's legacy in Northern Ireland is far from perfect. Now, we're not here to talk about the European Union, we're not here to talk about Northern Ireland, we're here to talk about Kashmir. But I think some of these lessons are universal and require universal principles, foremost of which is democratic self-determination, in order to keep political power under peaceful control in line with the will of the people. I will not rehearse everything that is in this Amnesty International report. It's a shocking set of revelations. What I will say is this. It is the case that India is a great democracy. But it's also the case that while the troubles were going on in Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom was also a great democracy, and a democracy with a great history. And I think we must ask ourselves, all of us, how it comes to pass that great democracies which seek to protect human rights, fundamental liberties, to provide peace and prosperity, how they slip into these human rights abuses. Detention of people for up to 25 years, it mentions here. 25 years in various prisons, much of it in preventative or administrative detention. And yet in the UK, today, in the shape of T-pins, we do have a form of administrative detention. So that's all I want to say about a general approach. And what I do bring to it, I hope, is humility. I think we all need to be careful in the words of condemnation we use, and we all need to be very aware of our own position. Secondly then, if we could turn to the United Nations, I thought the obvious place to begin was with the Charter of the United Nations, its purposes and principles. And if you will allow me, I would just like to read you the whole of Article 1, which has 4 short clauses. In the first place, the UN is to maintain international peace and security, and to that end to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about, by peaceful means, and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of the international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. That seems to me quite unequivocal and straightforward. Secondly, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. Thirdly, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language or religion. And fourthly, to be a centre for harmonising the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. Now, it does seem to me, ladies and gentlemen, that one need go very little further beyond the first article of the Charter of the United Nations to find the grounds why it should act, and should have long since acted, in defence of self-determination and peace in Kashmir. I'll just share with you one other article, which is Article 73. Article 73 is in Chapter 9 of the Charter, the declaration regarding non-self-governing territories. I'll just read you the introduction. Members of the United Nations which have or assume responsibilities for the administration of territories whose peoples have not yet attained a full measure of self-government recognise the principle that the interests of the inhabitants of these territories are paramount, and accept as a sacred trust the obligation to promote to the utmost, within the system of international peace and security established by the present Charter, the well-being of the inhabitants of these territories. And it goes on with a number of clauses which I will not read to you in full, but it includes their protection against abuses, to take due account of the political aspirations of the peoples, and to help them in the development of their free political institutions. Now, I think the history of Kashmir raises profound and difficult questions about the United Nations, its very existence, its purpose, its ability to fulfil its own charter. Now, when it came to Libya recently, I was filled with profound misgivings. I did not enjoy voting for action in Libya, but I chose to do it because I believe that in the world there is a place for international governments to ensure just these things which are set out in the United Nations Charter. I'll just go on then to the 1948 resolution itself and bring out one or two points. Within the resolution, it says, noting with satisfaction that both India and Pakistan desire that the question of the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India or Pakistan should be decided through the democratic method of a free and impartial plebiscite. It goes on and then says, it instructs the Commission to proceed at once to the Indian subcontinent and there to place its good offices and mediation at the disposal of the governments of India and Pakistan, with a view to facilitating the taking of necessary measures, both with respect to the restoration of peace and order, and to the holding of a plebiscite by the two governments, acting in cooperation with one another and with the Commission, and further instructs the Commission to keep the Council informed of the action taken under the resolution, and so on. Now, there are some measures placed on the government of Pakistan to secure withdrawal from the state of Jammu and Kashmir and so on. But I don't want to merely read you all of the resolutions, which I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. It seems to me that above all, the United Nations has failed Kashmir. It gives me no pleasure to say it. Now, this makes me turn then to the application of these principles in Kashmir. I don't believe it is in the world's interests to abandon some hope in the United Nations. It's been suggested to me that the British government might be a better third party to negotiate a settlement in Kashmir. Now, I don't believe that's true. I believe that it's in the British government's interests to ensure that there is a peaceful plebiscite in Kashmir and a settlement is reached. I think the British government should give greater voice to Kashmiri people in the UK. But I am acutely aware that this legacy is a legacy of the British Empire. I'm acutely aware, having met the Indian High Commissioner, that the voice of the British government is not welcome everywhere around the world. So I think we do need to put our faith in the United Nations. I think we need to bring increasing pressure on the UN to bear in this regard. If the United Nations is not the correct third-party mediator in this dispute, we should ask why it exists at all. And yet there is a need for it. So I think just as I voted in support of the United Nations for that action in Libya, so today I would say to you that we must support the United Nations in seeking to resolve the dispute in Kashmir. I return then to why these situations arise. And although I said earlier that perhaps politicians are the problem, in a very real sense they are, I don't think I've really ever met anybody who wanted to live other than in peace and prosperity, who wanted a hope for their children, who wanted to be able to find their own way in life and find fulfilment and the dignity of charting their own course. And that's as true in Kashmir as it is anywhere. I believe that if political power escapes democratic control, people will turn to violence. I think it is as inevitable as night following day. It is also, however, one of the most recent ideas in human history, this notion that the government has no power but the sovereign people. And it's an idea which has not caught on everywhere in the world, and yet we've seen this Arab Spring, which has, at least it seems, begun to show a greater adoption of the principles of democracy across the world. I think that therefore there is no better time for us to say to the United Nations that they must redouble their efforts to find a fresh start for Kashmir, a fresh set of relationships between India and Pakistan, respecting the wishes of the Kashmiri people to move forward to a plebiscite. We should recognise, however, that there are obstacles. Governments will always be concerned about their ability to tax the use of or the exploitation of minerals, people will always in this world be concerned about water rights and the shortages of water. The United Nations, it seems to me, is the right body to ensure that those kinds of concerns are dealt with. So finally, I've tried to say something about my approach, the need for humility from all of us in relation not just to this dispute, but in the context of others. I've said something about the United Nations, its charter, the resolution, and why I believe it should be supported. And I'll just reiterate my stance finally that in Kashmir I think it's vitally important that real progress is made and that the United Nations sees Kashmir as an opportunity to assert its role in the world and that it should emphasise and really reinforce its purpose as a body which brings peace and self-determination, fundamental human rights and prosperity. Finally, thank you very much indeed again for this opportunity to be with you. Very grateful to all of you for allowing me to represent the voice of my Kashmiri constituents in this way. Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you very much for that brilliant kind of overview of the UN Charter, the UN resolution, and also your own efforts in the House of Commons. Before I open up for questions, I just want to put on record a big thank you to the Pakistan High Commission, a big thank you to Government of Pakistan, and a big thank you to all the community leaders, mayors and councillors who have come here from all over the country, really to send a very clear message to the people of Kashmir that on Kashmir Solidarity Day, on 5th, 6th, 7th of February, we are with you until you get the right of self-determination, which is your legal right, which has affected the whole of South Asia. It has affected millions of people in Kashmir. And I'm grateful to my colleagues in the House of Commons, and even though I know that Dave Anderson is here and is not able to speak, and others who are here who have not been able to speak, I'm very grateful to them. But we want to say thank you, and perhaps with a round of applause you could say thank you to everyone who's here taking part. And Councillor Lashari, I've been told to say thank you by His Excellency. So now it's a great pleasure.
My Lord, thank you very much, but I think the High Commission also owes a wholehearted gratitude and vote thanks to you and the distinguished audience. And may I request the Deputy High Commissioner, before we open up the Q&A session, Mr. Nafi Zakia to for his vote thanks.
Oh, great.
My Lords, Honorable Member of Parliament,
I'll do it and come back.
I especially mention Dave Anderson, MP, distinguished Mayor, Councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I am privileged to present on behalf of the High Commissioner and all the officers our sincere and profound gratitude to the Honourable Speakers, MP Sir Richard Gerard Kaufman, Hilal Pakistan, Honourable Lord Kurban Sen, and Honourable MP Steve Baker for sharing their thoughts candidly on the world's most dangerous dispute. And of course, today's seminar could not have been complete without the popular and highly sought after Lord Nazir Ahmad, to whom also I would like to offer our deepest appreciation and thanks for eloquently moderating the seminar. Kashmir is an oozing wound, taking its toll on human lives and economic progress in the region. Due to decades of apathy of the international community, it has grown complex and precarious. It is very thoughtful and humane gesture of the illustrious speakers and the moderator to spare time for a noble cause which directly affects the lives of 1.5 billion people and has significant bearing on the very security of the entire South Asian region and world at large. I would also like to express our profound gratitude to the distinguished audience from various walks of life, members of the civil society, and the most respected segment of society which will respect this word, that is media persons, for travelling long distances to give a compassionate hearing. This is a great expression of their concern and solidarity with the Kashmiris. I am sure that today's seminar would have given the audience an insight into the issue of Kashmir, and they would take home the thought that what needs to be done further to help resolve the ticking time bomb of Kashmir. Thank you all again, honourable members of Parliament and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for your presence and time. Now we begin the Q&A session, after which the guests will be cordially invited for the refreshment. Thank you.
So my apologies, I had left my car on the meters outside, but I've sent somebody to go and sort it out. So I'll take questions. Please don't make long speeches. Questions, a very short comment. Ghalib Saab and Dr. Saab, and then you, sir. Ghalib Saab first.
Thank you, Lord. After the 1947, after the ceasefire and the promises made by the United Nations, the people of Jammu and Kashmir for 40 years, they have been trying to resolve the Kashmir issue through the peaceful means. Mr. Kaufman has gone through the history, and after the 1990, the people of Jammu and Kashmir have also tried the armed struggle. But after the 2008, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are also now going through a peaceful movement. Now, can this panel give us an option to the Kashmiri people? What is the option for them? Because of the dialogue between India and Pakistan are going from last many years, and there has been a dialogue for 130 times between India and Pakistan. But there is no result after resolving the Kashmir issue.
Thank you very much. We'll take 3 questions at a time, because then the panel can respond. Dr. Saab at the back.
I'd like to, thank you very much. This is great debate. Can I ask Lord Wazir, the wounds have turned into scars, painful scars. There may be a very great solution on the table, but what about those scars which are visible loud and clear? Do you have any solution to the people? There's a long list of martyrs. Where would the relatives go? We have to provide them some solution which can keep them quiet, keep them happy, keep them satisfied, and make it worthwhile. And I also respectfully disagree with the Honourable MP. The vested interest of the governments who are trying to resolve the issue of Kashmir have to be taken away. The countries who are selling arms to India, they cannot be party to resolving the issue. They put the burden on UN. You can't resolve that, because they have vested interest in the Kashmir issue. I'm sorry to be blunt here. This is how I feel about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chaudhry Azim Saab.
Thank you very much, Lord. I'm proud of you. You are here, and I am also proud of Lord.
Everybody proud of it.
And that's what I give him that. Thank you. We think, the brother said, if Pakistan fully, if they can have a demonstration about a judge in Pakistan when the Nawaz Sharif was working on the flooding, if the all Pakistan government has a wakil asiyat and then demonstration, because a government of Azad Kashmir always said Allah ke Pakistan, and the Jammu and Kashmir people said Allah ke Pakistan, what else they wanted?
Thank you, we'll answer that. Thank you so much. First of all, I'll ask Steve, because Steve Baker's been mentioned, so give him the opportunity, and then we'll ask the other panelists to answer the questions.
Well, if I may, I'll just take the first 2 questions together about scars and what hope for the Kashmiri people. I'd say this, that all nations bear their scars. All nations bear their scars. We've all, well, sooner or later we look back through our histories, and every nation has its disputes between peoples of different faiths or ethnicities and so on. And we always must find a way to forgive and to move forward. And that forgiveness is an extremely high barrier, but it must be that in terms of scars, people must find a way to move forward. I think the hope for the Kashmiri people is in the knowledge that they're not forgotten. Here we are today. I'm extremely grateful to the High Commissioner and to everybody else to have this opportunity to be here. We had our debate in Parliament. That is the highest chamber in this land, with respect to their noble lords. But the Parliament is the highest assembly in the land, giving voice to these concerns. The people are not forgotten, and there are those of us with a sincere wish that we should not be sitting here in another 60 years having the same conversation. We should not be having the same conversation. We should be moving forward. But to answer your point, sir, directly about vested interests, I think you're absolutely right to bring up the subject of vested interests, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk about it. I think we're stuck in this flawed and fallen world with political power. I think political power is absolutely necessary to defend life, liberty and property and people's rights. But there's always been a problem in all of human history that people will insist on turning to the political means to obtain their prosperity. And then we all of us have two choices, either to obtain our prosperity by force of arms or by force generally, or to use the economic means. And the economic means is difficult, time-consuming and risky. But the economic means is the just means to our prosperity. So I think you open up a very important and wide-ranging problem that actually everybody has vested interests. Everybody has vested interests, and everybody has a nation that they wish to, whose cause they wish to advance. And I think it is the job of the United Nations, and it's the job of statesmen. And I do say statesmen deliberately. It's one thing to be a politician and another to be a statesman. But it's a job of statesmen to be principled and show a higher standard of leadership, a leadership based on values, not expediency. And if people can be persuaded, if politicians can be found who will assert values, principles, and insist that we must all live and find our prosperity through the peaceful and economic means, not by recourse to the political means, if such people can be found, then perhaps the United Nations could operate in a way above vested interests and we can make progress. But I think, sir, you make a very relevant point. I think it's one of the most difficult points, frankly, in all of human existence. But nevertheless, flawed as our institutions are, I think we must press on and attempt to use the UN. But very happy to discuss it later.
Thank you. You've answered two questions. There's one more if anybody wants to answer, but I've got lots of other questions, so you can have the opportunity. The other question was in relation to people marching for the restoration of a judge, and why can't they march for Kashmir? I think that's what he meant.
That's not good.
Right, that's he's slapping. Because I got the question, you see. But anyway, we'll answer that in a few minutes. Councillor Saga, I know. I've got three here first, and then I'll come round to that's second, third round. First of all, Mayor of Brent. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Lord Aziz. Can I just say that I have listened to this debate here, and the account presented here is superb, really very informative, and four people that actually said things that I think are very relevant and important. But I think it's not a cliche, it's a fact, right? I mean, you're only as good as the people you've got, and I think, you know, the information that I think needs to be passed on to people is, what are we doing? The United Nations it's not a toothless arm. I mean, you've got people, you've got permanent who are there serving the world community, and if they are to be relied on to make decisions, then they should really be persuaded, and I think we in this country have a major role to play there, to make things happen. And if there are others who are not really doing it, then I think it's incumbent on us, our government here, to do something about it. You know, when it comes to Falkland or anywhere else in the part of the world, then you've got some situation where things are suddenly brought up high on the agenda, and because we just so happen we don't have oil there, or we don't have any minerals there, so to speak of, or other things, or we are not perhaps strategically important place geographically in that part of the world, we are given not a particularly attention that I think ought to be given. And I think, you know, this country has a big part to play because of the legacy and other issues of those kind. And I respect, you know, it's kind of difficult for perhaps Britain in the present, you might say that they are in to make significant impact. But I mean, you know, there are other places in the Middle East, and you know, Argentina is not too far away, and we can pressurize them to keep off Falkland, etc. Then I think we can do something about resolve the issue of Kashmir, and do so quickly.
Thank you very much. And just, Mr. Mayor, just to remind you that Falklands, Sorry?
I'm not a political guy, but...
No, I know. Thank you, Mr. Mann. Just to remind you that Falklands is part of our country, so we have to defend it. So, a little bit different. Councillor Liaquat Saab.
Thank you. Listening to the debate, excellent debate, having seminar and eloquent speakers here. And obviously, the Kashmir issue is the oldest issue on the United Nations table, and it's really important that is solved. And the only way to solve that is to make sure that is on the table and not forgotten. And it's really important that our government here plays a big part in it, because the United Nations doesn't run on its own. It is important that the government is part of that, putting pressure on that. And as everybody knows, India is, human rights violation, really terrible. And yet we're talking about, having them on the front seat of the United Nations. And so all of these are really sort of important for that, especially region, because it's costing us billions of pounds, and there won't be peace without Kashmir issue being resolved on that basis. But to resolve that, it's really important to be mindful of the Kashmiri people and all, and they play a big part in it to get that resolved.
Thank you very much. To my understanding, there have been 2 comments, not questions. So, Dave Anderson, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for inviting me here. Steve mentioned about the situation in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland situation really only started moving forward when a third party was allowed to be involved. That third party was Bill Clinton. I think we can say quite clearly today that isn't going to happen to the States. We really do need, we've got a third party to try in their charters, so eloquently said. When I asked my colleagues from Parliament across the parliamentary divide, what are we doing? Have we got a plan in the ABPG or elsewhere for us to start putting pressure first on our governments, then on other governments, but particularly on the United Nations? Because as Steve rightly said, we are the highest body in this country, the democratic process. If we don't make the case, nobody else will.
Thank you, Dave. That's a very good question. Just from APPG point of view, we've met with the Foreign Office Minister. We've written to Baroness Cathy Ashton, and we've also written to the Indian High Commissioner because we want to go and see them. There is limited amount of pressure that we can put on, but we certainly are trying. But I will ask any of my colleagues. Steve.
I'll just make 3 very quick responses. I think Dave's absolutely right. I think we should be acting together and moving forwards. And in terms of what I'm doing next, I'm very grateful to Councillor Mahbub Hussain Abati, who's been very generous in all of his support to me, and it's been a huge pleasure always to work with him. And he and I are going together with a few others to Kashmir in April. I'm very much looking forward to it, having not been there before. So I'm delighted to have going to Kashmir. But when I come back, obviously, I'll write letters to ministers based on what I've seen and the discussions we've had today, and I look forward to doing that. So I think we do have to ask the British government to give greater voice to citizens' concerns, and I think actually the British government can fairly represent British people of Kashmiri, Indian and Pakistani descent and represent them all on this issue. It's in all of their interests that it should be resolved. But what I don't want to do is give you unrealistic expectations. One of the reasons I came into politics was I was so fed up with how politicians were doing it, I thought I'd do it myself. So what I don't want to do is make grand promises and enter into some huge grandstanding to raise your expectations. We need to be realistic, and it's my intention to visit, to come back and to put pressure on the government. Just one final point, very briefly. I do think it would be wrong for India to have a permanent seat on the Security Council without real concrete progress.
One of our sisters whose men have had their go, I'll come back to you. One of our sisters, councillor from Luton, moved a resolution in Luton Council, and Councillor Mrs. Ayub is on the right. The mic should go to you.
Hello, Sonika. Thank you for inviting us over. 2 questions, actually. First question is, we see various forms of media here, but it's mostly, always actually, South Asian media that comes to these sort of events. But my question is, why don't we ever invite the BBC to come over here? Because that's more like the international media, where the Western people will actually see this issue. I mean, it's the third or fourth generation of British Kashmiris being born and bred up in England. And I only know about this issue through my parents or through my visits to Pakistan or through my husband. But I mean, the children, the youth of today, I don't think many of them know about this issue. If I talk to my colleagues, my Western colleagues, they've not even heard about the Kashmir issue. So I think there's a weakness there. So I think the international media, the Western media, definitely should be invited to these presentations, seminars, etc. And my other point is, we should all be singing the same tune. If you see, we're obviously Kashmiris, Pakistanis together. We're raising this issue on every platform that we can see. Thank you to Steve Bacon personally. I'd like to thank you. We were in the gallery watching you that day, and you did an excellent job there. We had our local MPs, Gary Shukar and Kelvin Hopkins there as well, and Lord Kamal Hussain was there as well. But my question is, we're giving India the MFN, like most favourite nations. Isn't that weakening the Kashmir issue? We should be giving them the MVN, which is the most violations nation, I think, in the world. You know, it's not being raised as that. So they're basically, it's just a biased attitude from the world that we're getting, and definitely we should involve the West.
Thank you very much for that. Randhawa Sahab, President, former President of the Pakistan UP Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much for giving me the Commerce. As Mr. Kaufman said, as Mr. Kaufman said, Pakistan has done. As Mr. Kaufman said, Pakistan has done everything humanly possible to resolve this issue, and this is very clear. And as my honourable friend Steve said, we need to apply international and universal principles. The question is, have we applied all those universal principles to solve the problem? If we haven't, is there any principle which is left? And if we have applied all of them, are they ineffective?
Thank you.
We'd like to develop the next step going forward.
Thank you. And there's a young man just next to you at the front. Yeah.
As part of the youth, Mr. President over here has just emphasized that first of all, very educated that youth briefed us on this. And the only comment I would like to make is that we would want to appreciate your efforts and we would want to take this forward. And the Kashmir Court should not be a dead end for anybody, because the youth of Pakistan look at it as their own cause, and we are the represent for this cause. Inshallah, we will take it forward from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This young man next to you, I'll take him as well, and then we'll. Yeah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. There's been a lot of talk about the United Nations today, and we've been asked to have faith in the United Nations resolutions and wait for the United Nations to come up with a solution for Kashmir. But deep down, we all know, deep down every one of us knows that it's not actually the United Nations that runs the world. It's Goldman Sachs and Shell Oil that runs the world. And, so the United Nations, an organization that will allow the recent slaughter and brutality in Syria, okay? The United Nations is an organization which will allow a Jewish state being carved into the Palestinian.
Can we not go into that, because we're talking about Kashmir and we really want to stay, I'm very grateful. Question on Kashmir I'll take, but otherwise I'll cut you off.
Yeah, I'm leading on to it. Okay. The United Nations, we've been asked to put faith in the United Nations, but we know the United Nations in fact doesn't have a lot of power. So what I want to ask the Liberal Democrat MP is that why don't we finally admit the United Nations will be unable to solve the issue effectively.
Thank you very much. Just if you can sit down now, because you've asked the question. Just to let you know that my very good friend, Sir Gerald Kaufman, is of Jewish background, and he's one of the staunchest supporters of the Palestinian cause in Parliament that I know. So, Jewish state and all that is very important subject that one should not relate to religion with any sort of. You've asked questions. There are two more people that I really need to take comments, and then I'm going to end. I'm afraid time is getting on and there's a vote in the Parliament as well at 7 o'clock. And so, Councillor Bhatti, Dr. Riyad, okay, I'll take all these 4 comments. Very quickly, comments please, or questions.
Do I leave it now? I think I can speak.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Sir, for this opportunity. Can I first of all take the opportunity of thanking the Pakistan High Commission for having this seminar at Pakistan High Commission on Solidarity Day in Kashmir, which I'm grateful and thankful to you. And I thought we were going to carry on more on this similar line. I also like to thank all the panel, which they made a very valuable contribution to the debate. And I would like to thank Kurban Sahib for the work he has done, raising a point and question at the House of Lords. Also Lord Nazir Sahib, the work he has done on the Kashmir Party or Party Community Group, and also raising it at the House of Lords. And I'm thankful to Steve Baker for something that we've been waiting for a number of years, for the last 60 years, that we could not achieve, which Steve has achieved it within 2 years, having a debate, leading a debate in House of Commons, first time ever in the history of Great Britain. I'm thankful to you, Steve, work you have done. The question is that I am working with James Alias, who is the chairman of All Party Kashmiri Group in Brussels, had so many meetings. He went with me when I was mayor of High Wycombe in 2000, and he set up an all-party Kashmiri group in Brussels. He done so many seminars and so much work, and so Emma Nicholson report. Rosa, give me a minute, please. Look, I'm making point. Let me speak. I'm speaking to Kashmiris, and they would like to know what I'm saying. If you can just please take it. The Emma Nicholson report. He has worked. I'm trying to tell what the people have done in Kashmir, and people would like to know what they have done. And Emma Nicholson report, he had made 474 amendments before that report went to the European Parliament. And I would like, my question is to what likely was said previously, that we have passed a resolution in the councils so many times. Now, Steve has made a history in Great Britain having a debate in House of Commons. I am trying to do a debate in the European Parliament. I just wonder, is it possible to have a debate in the House of Lords? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just make a correction? Because we are very grateful to Steve Baker for the debate he did in the House of Commons, but it was under new rules. There had been debates in the House of Commons in the past. So I think we really need to correct that, because it's not fair on people on Kashmir. Yes.
Questions, not debate. No, freedom of debate. I don't see.
No. Well, okay, but it doesn't matter. There have been members of Parliament.
Can I just say, if anybody wants, these things are matters of public record.
Yeah.
And, there was a half-hour adjournment debate, I think, at one stage. But although these things are called adjournment debates, they typically consist of a statement read by a member and a response by the listener. So I don't think we need to be just balanced about this. Many people have worked extremely hard over a very long time, but I was very pleased to secure a debate on the floor.
Well, great. Thank you very much for that. Just a comment? Yes. Or question?
When we are talking about Jammu and Kashmir, do you think we are including the Gilgit and Baltistan also in this minutes? The Gilgit and Baltistan.
Yes.
When we are talking about Jammu and Kashmir, we include the Gilgit and Baltistan.
Sandra?
I'm aware of the resolutions that failed in the UN regarding Kashmir. My question is very swift to each of the panelists. Why is it that we have success in East Timor and more recently in Sudan? Why not Kashmir? What's happened? What's gone wrong?
Thank you. Very last comment is Mayor of Maidenhead.
Just briefly, we've been talking to the United Nations and Europe for the last 60 years. It hasn't really got us anywhere. Egypt right now have marched into Tahrir Square, and that's what got them talking. All three of you should not be encouraging our people to actually go out and march, and that's the only way the United Nations and Europe will actually take notice of this.
Well, thank you very much for those fascinating questions and contributions. I'm just going to ask the panel just to wind up the discussion, and I'll start from Lord Kurban Hussain, and then we'll go to the other side.
Thank you. A couple of things that I'd like to say in response to a few questions that I heard earlier. And I'll go to the last question first, and that was the march. Now let me tell you, as much as I do, because not only that I was born in Azad Kashmir, but I also have friends living in Indian Kashmir, and I have contacts through many people like Nazir Qureshi and others who tell us on a daily basis what is happening in Kashmir. There are marches being held. Hundreds of thousands of people have marched through the streets of Srinagar and the towns many times a year. The only problem is that the Western media does not get any information about it, or they deliberately don't want to report it. That is the problem. Now, what I want to say to the question, to the answer to the question that the Ghalib Sahib made earlier, what we can do, I think what we can do is in Kashmir, carry on with your peaceful campaign and get the media, particularly the Western media, involved. We, the West, needs your pictures of your human rights violations on the screens of our television systems. And only when these pictures are shown on the television, on BBC, ITV and others, the British public will start taking notice, the British politicians will ultimately start taking notice, and so will the rest of the world. That is one. The other thing is that the UK diaspora here in this country, what we need to do is step up. Not that you're not doing, many of you are doing hard work over the years, and I know many faces in this hall who have been working very, very hard on the Kashmir issue for years and years. But let me say, please step up your campaign and give it towards lobbying the British parliamentarians and engaging the British media, as Councillor Nasima, you said earlier on. We must get the media, particularly the British media, involved in our meetings, such as this and many others that are held all over the country. I know, for example, this is the 4th meeting in this week that myself and Nazir and others and Sir Jamal Kaufman have attended to do the solidarity with Kashmiris throughout the country. Now, all I would say to you is that we need to, the biggest thing that you need to tell the world is the human rights violations that are taking place. They are the ones which are going to attract the attention of the world, and the world may start listening to us.
Thank you very much, but I have to say, thank you to all the Pakistani media that actually attend these functions, because the BBC will not. Even if you ask them, they will not. So, you really got to say thank you to those people who do. And that's why I'm grateful to Steve Baker, and I'm grateful to all MPs who do a wonderful job. But, we've got to try and get everybody else. Well, Gerald, final word, and then Steve, very final word.
First of all, briefly, Gilgit, there's no reason why it should not be included. The question is, can we get the process going? Two things I want to say. One, the United Nations is only as strong as the determination that we put into it. Steve has rightly said that he and I voted for the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973 on Libya. I don't know about Steve, but I do not know if I would have voted for it if I didn't know how corrupted the implementation of that resolution was by the Western powers, not to save the people of Benghazi, but to bring about a regime change with the murder of the leader of Libya. So it's very much a question of how United Nations resolutions are implemented and the strength of the United Nations, which has obviously got no strength whatever in Syria and has got no strength whatever in Palestine, because otherwise things will be happening there and they're not. Secondly, the media. And I speak as somebody who was a working journalist for 10 years before he went into the House of Commons and is still a member of the National Union of Journalists. The media in this country have been trivialised to an unbelievable extent. People suffering terrible traumas and injuries and people being killed in Kashmir, in Palestine, in other places, are not as important to them as whether Chris Huhn committed a driving offence and whether the chief executive of the Royal Bank Scotland got a bonus. The priorities of the media in this country are beyond contempt. And I say that as a journalist. And that being so, it is essential that we focus on these issues in a way that cannot be ignored. And the third point I make is this, and I think no apologies for making the point whatsoever. There are in this country between 1.25 million and 1.5 million voters of Pakistani, Bangladeshi origin. And those voters can make a difference in the constituencies in which they live. And it's about time that, regardless of political party, we focused to the government and to my own party on the fact that there are votes at stake here, because if they don't care about the principles, at least let them care about the votes.
Thank you very much. Steve, final word.
Well, thank you very much, and just once more, thank you all, because it's been a real privilege and pleasure to be here. As you know, this issue attracts genuine cross-party support, and I'm sure you've noticed that we've all been complimentary about one another, despite coming from different parties. But I just should say for the record, for the gentleman who referred to me as a gentleman, I think referred to me as a Liberal Democrat MP, I am actually a Conservative MP. I'm a Conservative. So the second, yeah. But yeah, the second point is, yes, Libya, I do share some of Sir Gerald's disappointment, but I don't wish to say anything further about it tonight. But I voted for the defence of the people and nothing more. In terms of the media, I think Sir Gerald's absolutely right about the agenda and the way it works. It's a terrifying thing to be in the public eye before it. I think the right way to get into the media is to remind people that there are thousands of people in this country who care about this issue, and rightly so. And I think that if protest is lawful and peaceful, I think it's legitimate. But I must emphasise it must be lawful and peaceful, and indeed considerate if it's not going to be counterproductive. And with that in mind, I would just say that in all of this, as we make progress together, I would just make an appeal finally, not just people here, but to people watching through the media, that whatever we do, it must be peaceful, lawful and principled. And I believe that one of those most important principles is this one, that each one of us, whoever we are, wherever we come from, whatever our origins, we are all morally, politically and legally equal to one another. And out of all of these principles is derived something which is absolutely relevant to Kashmir, absolutely relevant within the European Union, absolutely relevant as a universal principle, and that is political self-determination at the ballot box, such that political power has no other authority but the sovereign people. Thank you.
Final sort of thank yous to everyone. Once again, the sister asked a question in relation to India being the most favoured state. Just on a closing note, I'm the most unfavoured person in Azad Kashmir, so that doesn't really matter. Thank you, and where do we move, sir?
Thank you.
Of course, sir.
May I request all of you to raise your hands, people who are from Kashmir. Can you count them in this hall? And how many Kashmiris are here on this 5th of Solidarity Day, the 5th of February? Anyway, what I wanted to convey to you is that let's all resolve this day that next year, on 5th of Feb, there should be at least 500,000 march in London.
That's right, very good. That's very good.
Pakistan High Commission, Government of Pakistan, Pakistan has been to war thrice in India. We have sacrificed, we have been sacrificing. But the people, you are 1.2 billion people here. As Sir Gerald said about your voting rights, about your presence, you must make your presence felt here. You must come out in the street, peaceful demonstration, raise your voice, tell the people what is happening in Kashmir. This is not the way, just making these speeches and discussing is not the way out of this. Thank you very much.
Just brings us to the end of this seminar. Once again, a very wholehearted and sincere thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening.